Hello everyone and welcome to day 10 of the 20-day flower creation journey. My name is Luisa and this is the Lulu Blue Studio. Today we are going to paint together this lupine. Lupine is this plant with a very long stem and small purple blue flowers hanging left and right in a triangular shape. To create this plant, this flower, the lupine, I'm going to start using my filbert brush in size 8 and I'm going to mix on my color palette a little bit of ultramarine violet and a little bit of blue, a little bit of magenta. The blue I'm using is phthalo turquoise and I create this purple mixture to start to create the flowers. The flowers are just small touches of this filbert brush with the belly of the brush and with the side of the brush. I'm going to take full advantage of the shape of this filbert brush to create all of these flowers, because just by pressing the belly and the side of the brush, I exactly have the shape of these little lupine flowers. What I'm taking care of doing at the moment is to create different colors, so color use, where I mix different percentages on my color palette of ultramarine violet and blue. And I also take care to remove part of the color in my cup of water to use different color values to create different flowers. In this way, we are going to create a composition that is not static, that is beautiful to look at, because there is some movement in the composition in itself. I started creating the base of these flowers and I'm keeping in mind to leave some white space in the middle where I'm going to create in a second step the stem where these flowers are going to hang from. Looking at the reference picture, I see that the lupine plant has a triangular shape. This means that the base is slightly larger and all these flowers are going to hang from the stem and they will end in a very pointy tip. The more I create the flowers on the top and the more I remove part of the purple pigment, the ultramarine violet, and I started to create the last flowers on the top that are more towards the green color, where I add a little bit of sap green and a little bit of yellow. To create these small flowers on the top, I just use the side of this brush, because with the side I'm able to create some strokes that are very fine. I do not use a lot of pressure and I just let the paint be laid onto the paper. I started to create the second lupine plant by using a concentrated mixture of ultramarine violet and magenta and with a touch of blue, and I keep repeating the same process that I have used in first place. So I keep using the side of my filbert brush and the belly of my brush to create these flowers, remembering to keep a white space in the middle, because in a second stage I'm going to create the stem, and so I keep changing the color value of the pigments that I have on my brush, and I keep pressing and touching the paper very slightly to create these beautiful purple flowers. Also in this case, I started creating the second plant starting from the base, and I'm reaching the top and remembering that the top has a pointy shape and needs to be painted towards the green and yellow color. So in fact, what I'm doing is to define better the shape at this point. I am enlarging a little bit the base of these flowers and I am now using a little bit of sap green to start creating the flowers that are on the top of this plant. I keep using a more concentrated ultramarine violet, and I create a larger base for this second lupine, looking always at the reference picture to understand how the flowers are hanging from the main stem. Looking at the reference picture, I notice that there is a third plant of lupine, so this is what I started to do now. I started to create the base and so the flowers of this third plant. As always, I keep in mind to change the color value of my flowers, removing part of the pigment into my cup of water, but I also remember to change the hue, so the color in itself, by mixing together different amounts of ultramarine violet, magenta and blue. I change the motion of my wrist in order to create flowers that are hanging left and right, the stem that I will create in a second stage. The more I reach the top of this plant, the more I create flowers that are light in value. I add a little bit of magenta to my color mixture to change the color hue, and I keep creating some flowers on the left and on the side, especially towards the base of this third plant of lupine. As I am reaching the top of this plant, I almost have no purple pigment on my brush, and instead I started to mix a little bit of green, sap green, to start to create these flowers at the very top of this plant. I allow some of this green to blend into the purple flowers, and some of the flowers instead are in very concentrated mixture of green and yellow lemon dip. It's time now to take my mop brush and to use just the very thin tip of this brush to start to create the stem in the middle of these flowers. I mix a little bit of sap green with what I have on my color palette, and keeping a very light pressure onto the paper, I started to create this stem where I left the white space in the middle of all of these lupine plants. In this case, I prefer to use this mop brush compared to a round brush in size 6 because I have the feeling this stem is a very important part of this flower because the flowers are not that big and the stem is quite prominent. Therefore, I wanted this stem to be a little bit more loose than what I could achieve if I instead use a round brush. With the same mop brush, I started to create also the leaves of this plant, and leaves are quite big and in green color, long in shape and quite pointy. So this is what I'm going to reproduce here. I also add into the wet green a little bit of purple because purple is the color that we used for the flowers. And in this case, we're going to have a blend effect between the bright green and the purple color, and we will obtain, when the whole composition is going to be dry, a sort of green that is a little bit more muted and not as bright as it would be if I would have used just sap green. So looking at the reference picture, I'm trying to recreate these leaves and a little bit of buds that I notice are present in the lower part of the composition. I try to keep my style very loose. I try not to be as precise to create these leaves, and I try to change the color values of these leaves to create a composition that overall is very interesting to look at. I'm taking the reference picture indeed as a reference, and I do not have to be too precise to reproduce what I see 100%, but I allow myself to play with color, to add a little bit of violet into the wet green. I allow myself to see what is coming up while I'm painting this composition, and I just stare at the result and then I decide what to do next. In fact, at the moment I'm just adding some additional strokes in darker color, and I look at the whole piece to understand where I want to add some contrast. At this point, I'm pretty happy with the result that I've obtained, and therefore I rinse my brushes, and this is the end of this tutorial. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope to see you on day 11.